All right, we have our electronics mounted in our vehicle here, our tires glued and mounted, and for the sake of the video, we have a clear body here on the car. What we want to do is set the ride height of the vehicle, and the ride height is basically the height of the vehicle off of the surface as it's just riding along, hence the ride height. And it controls the way that the car handles and how much clearance you have for compressing and landing jumps. It has a lot to do with the performance of the vehicle. You want to set your ride height always with the car, what I would call 100% track ready. So you have your tires on, you have your body on, you have your battery in the car, all of your suspension and everything is set up to go onto the track. So what you're going to do here is, the first thing I'm going to do, because this is a new car, I'm going to use some calipers, and basically I want to just make sure that the collar, from the collar to the top of the shock, is the same on both fronts and both rears. Not the same on all four, but just that the fronts and rears match. That way the preload is even from side to side. So this is 4.66, 4.57, 4.69, very close. And then here in the rear, they pretty much match. Okay. So you can put the calipers away. After that, we're just going to count how many turns we do, and we're going to do the same on both left and right shocks, and it'll keep everything the same. So to set the ride height, I pick the car up and I'm going to drop it here from about 12 inches onto the table. But because of how many times or how often we use slick tires now, or tires that are really sticky to a surface like this firm pit board, I'm actually going to do this where I actually kind of let it roll a little bit into a settled position. That way the stickiness of the tires doesn't affect the ride height. So just drop the car there. I'm going to check the rear. I'm going to use this low-C ride height gauge and basically just move it up until I see that it touched the rear of the car. See where we're at? So we're right about 19.5 millimeters in the rear. And about 21 in the front. So what I'm going to set this car to start is 21. So now I'm going to set my gauge to 21, and I'm going to adjust the car so that I can basically slide this right under, and it should sit with no gap, but not really move the car when it goes underneath. So I need to raise the rear. So I did 4 quarter turns, which should be 1 turn total. I need to lower the front. I'm going to do a half turn. So with these collars, you basically put more or less pressure on the spring to raise or lower how high the car sits statically. So now I'm going to drop the car again, and with my ride height gauge, go ahead and check. So I need to raise the rear a little bit more. So I did 4 more quarter turns. And 2 more. And again, I'm going to 21 millimeters. All right, so that was 1 too many. And perfect. All right, now the front is a little bit too high, so we're going to go ahead and lower that. And by lowering, to lower the car, you're actually going to raise the collar up, and you're going to turn it anti-clockwise so that it screws itself up. So we need to go quite a bit here in the front. So in my head, as I'm doing this, I'm counting. So I just did 6 on each side. Again, just making sure that they match. One, 2, 3, 4. All right. So there we have our ride height set to 21, both front and rear. Generally, if you run a higher ride height, it's going to jump and land better. It's going to give you more clearance to the ground. So the car will be basically have more pressure on it when it comes into land and more resistance to bottoming out. It's also going to have more resistance to preloading on the face of a jump. So it's going to make it, it's going to give it more preload without bottoming out and then more lift off the jump. It's also going to put the weight of the car a little bit higher, and it's going to have that end of the car roll a little bit more. If you lower your ride height, kind of the opposite happens. You get the weight of that end of the car a little bit lower, and the car tends to roll a little bit less. The car rolls less, it generally has a little bit less grip, so you would generally lower the car when the grip of the track gets really high. It also can bottom out a little bit easier when you're landing jumps because it's already sitting lower, and it's easier for the chassis to get down, and the same thing for it to bottom out on bumps or on jump takeoffs when it's preloading and not get as much of a spring, kind of jump lower and flatter. So when the grip gets really high, we tend to run the ride height lower. When it's really low, we run it higher. About the highest we run a two-wheel buggy these days is 23 millimeters front and rear. And the lowest that we tend to run on clay is 19 or 20 millimeters. And on carpet, we usually run in the 14 to 16 millimeter range on a two-wheel buggy. One thing that I'll mention too is that we can do something called rake, which is where you would run maybe the front end a little bit higher than the rear. This puts more weight on the rear tires, gives you a little bit more rear grip. This is something that's good to do in really low circumstances. So maybe if you're on an outdoor pin style track, you might want to run like 23 in the front and maybe 22 in the back. Just put a little bit more pressure there on those back tires. When you measure the back of the car, make sure to do it here underneath the diff gear where the chassis is flat and not here under the toe block where the chassis steps up. In the front, we measure right here just behind the bend in the chassis. So yeah, get that ride height dialed in. We're going to start off at 21 millimeters here for this 22 5.0 DC roller, and we're going to hit the track and have some fun.